The rain fell in relentless silver sheets over the city of Viridia, turning the bustling streets into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. Sarah Chen, a young graphic designer with a portfolio heavier than her bank account, pulled her worn woolen coat tighter around her shoulders, the damp chill seeping into her bones. Her umbrella, a cheap convenience store purchase, fought a valiant but losing battle against the downpour as she hurried from the late-night bus stop toward her small studio apartment. The shortcut through Elmwood Park, usually a haven of quiet, was a sodden, gloomy tunnel of dripping trees tonight. That's when she saw him, a huddled figure on a bench, partially shielded by a skeletal oak. He was just a dark shape against the gray, but something about the utter stillness of his posture struck her. Not sleeping, just enduring. As she drew closer, the beam of a distant street lamp illuminated the scene. The man was drenched. His clothes, a simple, mud-splattered pair of jeans and a dark jacket that had long since surrendered to the rain, clung to him. A worn backpack sat beside him, and he was staring at his hands as if they held the answers to the storm. Sarah's pace slowed. Her mother's voice, gentle but firm, echoed in her head. "Look with your heart, Sarah, not just your eyes." She had $23 to her name until her freelance payment cleared in 3 days. A rational voice told her to keep walking, to get dry, to be safe, but her feet stopped of their own accord. "Excuse me?" she called out, her voice almost swallowed by the drumming rain. "You're going to catch pneumonia out here." The man looked up. His face was etched with a deep weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He had sharp, intelligent blue eyes, though currently clouded with a profound sadness, and a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble. He looked to be in his late 30s, but the hardship seemed to add years. He gave a slight, humorless smile. "I've survived worse." His voice was low, rough from disuse or the cold, but it held an unexpected timbre, a resonance that didn't match his circumstances. Sarah hesitated for only a second longer before stepping under the scant shelter of the oak, holding her pathetic umbrella over both of them. "Come on, there's a 24-hour diner 2 blocks from here. It's warm, and the coffee is terrible, but hot. My treat." He studied her, his gaze searching her face with an intensity that was unnerving. He was looking for pity, she realized, or perhaps condescension. Finding neither, only a genuine, stubborn concern, something in his posture relaxed a fraction. "You shouldn't," he said simply. "Probably not," Sarah agreed with a small shrug, a droplet of water falling from the tip of her nose. "But I'm going to. I'm Sarah." "Jake," he finally said, the name sounding like a secret he was reluctantly surrendering. The diner, Gus's Griddle, was a bubble of steamy, greasy warmth. The vinyl booths were cracked, the air smelled of fried onions and old coffee, and the fluorescent lights hummed a steady, comforting tune. The few other patrons, a night shift worker and a couple of students, barely glanced up as Sarah shepherded a dripping Jake into a corner booth. He moved with a strange, innate grace, she noticed, despite being soaked to the skin. He didn't slump or shuffle. He just seemed to fold himself into the seat with a quiet dignity that again felt at odds with his appearance. A waitress named Darla, with a tired smile and a sharp eye, brought them menus. 2 coffees, please," Sarah said, ignoring the menu, "and 2 orders of the blueberry pancakes. Extra syrup." Jake started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "You need the calories, and I'm hungry. It's a mutual benefit." Over the coffee, which was indeed terrible and perfect, he began to talk in short, clipped sentences. He spoke of being between things, of losing his footing, of needing to be invisible for a while. He was careful, vague, but the pain beneath the words was crystalline. Sarah didn't press. She spoke instead of her own life, the struggle of freelance work, her dream of starting her own small design studio, her love for the city despite its hardness, her tiny apartment filled with secondhand books and thriving plants. "You see the potential in things," Jake observed quietly, watching her animate as she described a logo concept inspired by the ginkgo trees in the park. "The beauty others miss. Someone has to," she smiled. When the food came, he ate with a deliberate, controlled pace. Sarah chattered on, filling the silences with stories of difficult clients and her cat Mochi, who believed he was a tiny furry dictator. For the first time, she saw a real smile touch Jake's eyes, a fleeting light that transformed his entire face. It was a handsome face, she realized with a slight internal jolt, beneath the grime and grief. The rain had eased to a drizzle when they finally left. Sarah's $23 was now $5, but the hollow feeling in her chest from her own loneliness was gone, replaced by a different, warmer fullness. "Thank you, Sarah," Jake said on the sidewalk, his voice thick. You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said softly. Then, on an impulse she couldn't explain, she reached into her bag and pulled out her spare key. It was attached to a small, hand-painted ceramic sunflower keychain she'd made. "Look, my building's laundry room is in the basement. It's always unlocked during the day. It's warm, dry, and no one bothers you. There's a sink, too." She pressed the key into his hand, closing his fingers around the sunflower. Just so you have a place to get out of the weather. To get clean, you can leave the key under the mat by the back door when you're done." Jake stared at the key in his palm, as if she'd handed him a diamond. His throat worked. "I can't take this." "You can," she insisted. "It's just a key. Return it whenever." She gave him her address, a simple act of trust that felt both reckless and utterly right. "Be safe, Jake." She turned and walked away, feeling his gaze on her back until she turned the corner. Jake stood frozen on the wet pavement, the ceramic sunflower digging into his palm. Jacob Thorne, that was his name, or it had been, before he'd walked away from it all 3 months ago. CEO of Thorne Innovations, a tech empire he'd built from his college dorm room, a billionaire by 30, and utterly, completely broken. His exit hadn't been a dramatic boardroom resignation. It had been a silent, private shattering. The relentless pressure, the hollow victories, the friends who were transactional entities, and the devastating, lonely realization that his fortune was a gilded cage. The final straw had been cold and corporate, a hostile takeover attempt of a family-run supplier, a move his board had championed for pure profit. He'd seen the actuarial reports, the human cost reduced to spreadsheet cells. That night he'd left his penthouse, his tailored suits, his Rolex, and his identity in a locked safe. He'd bought the cheapest clothes he could find, shouldered an old backpack, and vanished into the city, wanting to see if anything of him remained when stripped of every external marker of success. He'd discovered a harsh, indifferent world. He'd learned the gnawing reality of hunger, the bone-deep ache of constant cold, the way people looked through you when you had nothing. He'd been called names, kicked off benches, and treated as less than human. The experience had humbled him to dust. And just as he'd reached his lowest point, sitting in that park in the rain, contemplating the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose, she had appeared. Sarah, with her kind eyes, her terrible umbrella, and her simple, profound offer of pancakes and humanity. She saw Jake, not a problem to be avoided or a project to be fixed. She'd shared her dreams with a homeless man. She'd given him her key. The next day, warily, he used it. The basement of her modest apartment building was dim and smelled of detergent and concrete. He washed his clothes in the sink, scrubbed the city's grime from his skin, and shaved with a disposable razor he'd bought with his last few coins, watching the stranger in the mirror slowly transform back into someone he recognized, though the eyes were different now, softer, wiser, haunted. He didn't want to overstep. He returned the key under the mat, as promised. But 2 days later, he was back in the park near her bus stop, not to beg, but to see her. When she came home from a grocery run, struggling with heavy bags, he stepped out of the shadows. "Let me help," he said, and before she could protest, he'd taken the bags. She blinked in surprise, seeing him clean, shaven, looking stronger. "Jake, you look better." "I feel better, thanks to you." He walked her to her door. It became a pattern. He'd appear in the late afternoons, sometimes with a single flower picked from a public garden, sometimes just to walk with her the few blocks home. He started doing small things. He fixed the wobbly table on her tiny balcony with tools borrowed from the building superintendent's open closet. He helped her reorganize her portfolio website, offering insights on user experience that were so instinctively brilliant they left her stunned. "How do you know all this?" she asked one evening, as they sat on her floor, eating takeout sushi. He shrugged, the practiced vagueness returning. "Picked things up here and there. Had a job in tech once, a long time ago." In return, she offered him a world he'd forgotten. She showed him her favorite hidden mural in the city, a vibrant phoenix painted on a forgotten alley wall. They spent a Saturday in the public library, and he remembered the simple joy of getting lost in a book, without 1,000 notifications pulling him away. She taught him how to properly care for her plants, and he, who had once commanded boardrooms, found profound satisfaction in correctly watering a peace lily. The more time he spent with her, the more the carefully constructed walls around Jacob Thorne crumbled. He was falling in love with her. Not with a socialite or a business partner, but with a woman whose wealth was measured in kindness, creativity, and resilience. He loved the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the sound of her laugh, the fierce way she defended her ideas, and the gentle way she treated everyone, from the grumpy barista to him. But the lie of his omission grew heavier each day. He knew he had to tell her. The thought of her feeling betrayed, of seeing the warmth in her eyes turn to hurt and anger, was a physical pain. He planned to confess 12 times, but the perfect quiet moment they shared, laughing over Burke cookies, debating the best 80s movie, simply sitting in comfortable silence, always felt too precious to shatter. Meanwhile, Sarah was falling just as deeply. Jake was a mystery, but he was her mystery. He was insightful, patient, and carried a sadness she ached to heal. He listened to her in a way no one ever had, as if her thoughts were the most important thing in the world. She found herself daydreaming about a future with him, a silly, hopeful fantasy of a shared studio space, him building something stable, her designing, a life built together from the ground up. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. Sarah landed her biggest client yet, a rebranding project for a mid-sized tech firm. Thrilled, she worked day and night. One evening, overwhelmed and facing a creative block, she left her laptop open on the living room floor as she went to make tea. On screen was her research, including a news article about the reclusive billionaire Jacob Thorne, who had mysteriously disappeared months ago. A prominent recent photo of Thorne, clean-shaven, in a sharp suit, but with those same piercing, intelligent blue eyes, was front and center. Jake, coming in from the balcony where he'd been repotting a fern for her, froze. His eyes locked on the screen. His blood ran cold. Sarah returned, mug in hand, and followed his gaze. She looked at the screen, then at Jake's pale, stricken face. Back at the screen. The pieces impossibly, horrifyingly clicked into place. The tech knowledge, the innate leadership grace, the occasional, oddly precise reference to places and things far beyond a homeless man's reach. The eyes, they were the same eyes. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Sarah," he whispered, the word a plea. "Jacob Thorne?" Her voice was small, disbelieving. You're him? All this time? Was this some kind of experiment? A social experiment for the rich and bored? The hurt in her voice was a physical force, pushing him back. "No, God, no, Sarah. It was never about you. It was about me. I was lost. I had everything and nothing. I needed to disappear, to see if I was even a person without the money, the title." "And you used me to do it," she cut in, tears now streaming down her face. "My key, my home, my feelings. Was it all part of the experience? Slumming it with the poor, kind-hearted designer?" The bitterness was unlike her, which made it all the more devastating. "Everything I told you was true. Everything I felt was true," he said, desperation clawing at him. "The man you know, Jake, that is me. More me than Jacob Thorne ever was. You showed me what real connection is. You showed me a life that has meaning. I love you, Sarah. I fell in love with you." "Don't," she choked out, wrapping her arms around herself. "Don't say that. You lied to me every single day. You let me believe you were vulnerable. You let me worry about you. How could you?" The betrayal was a vast, yawning chasm between them. He knew then that words, even true ones, were useless. The foundation of trust was gone. "I'm so sorry," he said, his own vision blurring. "I was a coward. I was selfish. I found something more precious than anything I've ever owned, and I was too afraid of losing it to be honest." He took a step toward the door, his heart breaking with every movement. "You won't have to see me again." He left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Sarah alone amidst the shattered ceramic and the even more shattered pieces of her heart. The following weeks were a gray, painful blur for both of them. Sarah threw herself into her work with a furious, heartbroken energy, channeling her pain into a stunningly successful rebrand for her client. But her apartment felt cavernously empty. She missed his quiet presence, the way he'd hum while fixing things, the thoughtful questions he'd ask about her work. The betrayal was a sharp, constant ache, but intertwined with it was the memory of the man she'd known, the one who listened, who helped, who looked at her as if she hung the moon. Could that all have been an act? Her heart said no, but her mind, wounded and protective, screamed yes. Jake, forced back into the world of Jacob Thorne, was a ghost in his own life. He returned to Thorne Innovations, not as a conquering hero, but as a changed man. He immediately halted the hostile takeover, restructuring the deal into a supportive partnership. He fired the most cutthroat members of his board, instituted company-wide volunteer days, and diverted a significant portion of his personal wealth into city shelters and programs for the homeless. Anonymous donations, but with Sarah's compassionate model in mind. He lived not in his penthouse, but in a simple, airy loft. The billionaire's life now felt like a costume. The real man, he knew, was the one who had loved Sarah Chen. He knew he had to earn her trust, not with his wealth, but with the truth and with actions. He wrote her a letter, not on corporate letterhead, but on simple paper with a pen. He didn't send it to her apartment. He knew she wouldn't accept it. Instead, he left it with Darla at Gus's griddle, with a plea and a substantial tip. A week later, driven by a mix of curiosity and unresolved pain, Sarah went to the diner. Darla silently slid the envelope across the counter. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. He didn't defend his deception. He detailed his breakdown, his journey into invisibility, his despair. He described the moment she'd approached him in the rain as the first crack of light in a dark year. He wrote about how she had rebuilt his understanding of the world piece by piece, with pancakes, conversation, and unconditional kindness. He confessed his love, not as a billionaire claiming a prize, but as a man who had been lost and found his compass in her. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply ended with, "The man you met in the rain is the truest version of myself I've ever known. He is yours, if you'll have him. If not, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the kindness you showed a stranger. Always, Jake." She cried in the diner booth, the letter clutched to her chest. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave it context. It made the man she loved real again, flawed and human. But she started seeing his actions in the city. The new community center funded by an anonymous donor. The humane policies reported at Thorne Innovations. She saw Jake in those actions, not Jacob Thorne. The turning point came on a rainy afternoon, remarkably similar to the first day they'd met. Sarah was in Elmwood Park, seeking inspiration, when she saw him. He was standing by the same bench, but he wasn't sitting. He was overseeing the installation of a small, elegant, weatherproof shelter, with a bench, a bookshelf stocked with free books, and a charging station. A plaque simply read, "A dry place to rest." He was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, talking earnestly with the city workers. He turned and saw her. The world narrowed to the space between them. He didn't approach, just waited, his expression open, vulnerable, and full of a hope so fragile it hurt to see. Sarah walked toward him, her heart pounding. She stopped a few feet away. The rain was gentle now, a mist in the air. "You built a shelter," she said, her voice unsteady. "I wanted to pay it forward," he replied softly, "to make sure no one has to sit in the rain without a choice." She looked at the structure, then back at him, seeing the weary man from the bench, the kind man from her apartment, and the remorseful man from the letter, all in one. The lie was a scar, but it wasn't the whole story. "The letter," she began. Every word was true. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "You hurt me, Jake, or Jacob, whoever you are. I'm Jake, he said with absolute certainty. I'm the man who loves you, who is desperately sorry, who will spend every day proving he's the man you believed him to be. The silence stretched, filled with the patter of rain and the distant city sounds. Sarah thought of the key, the sunflower, the pancakes, the laughter, the shattered mug, and the profound loneliness of the past weeks without him. Proving it might take a while, she said finally, a tentative, fragile thread of her old warmth returning to her voice. A wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees washed over him. I have time, he whispered. All the time in the world. He didn't move to hug her, respecting the distance she still needed. But he offered his hand, palm up, an invitation, not a demand. Sarah looked at his hand, then into his eyes, those clear blue honest eyes that had seen despair and found hope, partly because of her. Slowly, tentatively, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. A promise. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where all was instantly forgiven. It was a beginning. Raw and real. They had a long road of honest conversations. Rebuilt trust and navigating the vast gulf between their worlds. But as they stood there in the soft rain, hands clasped, by the bench where their story had begun, they both knew the foundation was there. It had been poured, not with gold, but with kindness, forged in truth, and built on the understanding that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with a simple act of seeing the person behind the circumstances, and having the courage to offer a key, a pancake, and an open heart.